This is Cold Start.
Welcome to our discussion around security driving. That's executive protection, or known by other names, driving in a way that helps you defend against outside attacks or evasive maneuvers. What exactly are we defining this as, security driving?
Well, I feel like security driving is driving around an important person. It's driving in a manner that you're trying to keep your payload, or in the industry they call it the principal, as safe as possible. So it's professional driving in a public setting. So we've talked a lot about professional driving in regards to racing and racing cars on racetracks, but there's other forms of professional driving. There's other areas in which there's a driving focus that we need to operate vehicles at a higher echelon or a higher ability, even outside of the racetrack.
Yeah, out on the public roads, there's a need sometimes to make an evasive maneuver or do something defensive, maybe because of the circumstances or the conditions that you're driving through, maybe because of that high-profile individual that you might be transporting, and maybe there's people who have it in for that person, or they're just a high-profile target by the nature of their name, their job, their status, whatever situation they might happen to be in, and getting those people from point A to point B. Well, it's not as straightforward as it used to be back when the world was a simpler place, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that there's been a pretty big shift in this space, especially in the modern era where we have these large organizations, whether that's in the tech industry or other industries, that have pretty much very important people that have access to data and information, stuff that other people who might not have the best intentions might want to have access to for whatever sort of influential purpose. And so now these people within the executive branch of companies have become points of interest of targets. And so there needs to be a safe way to transport these individuals from point A to point B to ensure their safety.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. If you think about the nature of this sort of area, immediately what comes to mind is protecting members of state, people that are affiliated with the government or a ruling party or agency. They're the ones who primarily needed protection in the past. If you think about historically, back in the Romans, they had what they called the Praetorian Guards. So I'd imagine those members of state, those government officials over time who were seen as the most important people that we had to protect, that sort of spilled over into regular life, right? And these are executives of corporations. Maybe these are famous celebrity or sports individuals, athletes, anybody who's identifiable and potentially, maybe by that definition, at risk because people want to affiliate with them. They want what those people have. They have information. They have money. They have jewelry. They have things or access that is something that maybe some nefarious individual or organization might want to get from them. So that sort of raised the stakes on people who are in those public-facing or public-aware kind of roles, like being the head of a big company. And I think with that came the same type of protections that we were used to giving members of our state, giving the president or people who were protected by the Secret Service or some police-type organization. That now spills over into, regular people or members of individual organizations that maybe span between this sort of government type of a reach and what an individual private person has in their sphere of influence or impact.
Yeah, I think that this range has spilled over and is more commonplace, like you're talking about, than most people might think, right? I mean, we think about motorcades and the president coming to town and all the security personnel and drivers that are around them. But yeah, on a day-to-day basis, there is this other need, there's this other market, and important people need to be transported from point A to point B. And interestingly enough, statistics do show that the most dangerous place that a person can be is inside or around a stopped vehicle. And so this presents a very kind of significant area in which that person might be at risk from an attack, right? That's worst case scenario. And in the most part, just being out on the roadways is an uncontrolled environment. Anything can happen, right? The simplest things of hitting an obstacle on a highway or another motorist that isn't paying attention, all these things could potentially harm an important person. And that's kind of why we're talking about this topic today. It's really interesting. We talked about racing, we talked about, the process that it takes to become a racer or even doing track days and everything that you need to learn. And it's also a fascinating industry to learn what these individuals have to go through, what skill sets they have to take on to be able to be successful in this industry. And also, I'm also involved in this industry as an instructor. And so besides my not normal day job, I'm a chief instructor for a security driver training company. And it's been a really, really interesting process for me to go through and learn this new industry and bring my skill set as a professional driver and apply them to something that's totally foreign to me, which is security and, personal protection and all that good stuff.
That's super cool. How did you get involved with this in the first place? I can't imagine there's just a place you go apply to say, I want to learn how to teach other people defensive or evasive driving.
Yeah, I mean, it is an interesting career path of being a quote-unquote professional driver, right? You go and race and you have your fun and you have this background of being able to operate motor vehicles very, very well. Basically, at the end of the day, that's what it boils down to. And so being an instructor is a way as a pro driver to actually make some money. I mean, racing costs money. To be able to make some money as a pro driver, you basically sell your skill set as an instructor and you go out and you teach other people in different disciplines. And so the way that I came into getting involved in security driving was just kind of word of mouth. I mean, instructors know other instructors and other pro drivers, and it was all recommendation of, hey, this group of people that's running security driver training is looking for an instructor. If you got availability in your schedule, give them a try and get involved. And so the company that I got involved with is called AS3 Driver Training. And so that company, the way that it came about within driver training or security driver training was it was founded by two brothers down in Mexico City, Mexico. And we can all imagine down in Mexico City, Mexico, that there is a lot of need for security drivers and protection. And in that city, there's a lot of things that happen and go down. And so they started the company down there. The reason why these two brothers started the company is they found that there was actually an empty space within the security driver training market. And what that empty space was one of the brothers was heavily involved in ransom negotiations. So he was involved in the security industry. The other brother was a professional race car driver. And what they found with the driver training side of security was either these trainings were taught by professional race car drivers who knew nothing about security and had no security background, or it was taught by people with a lot of security background but zero driving background. And so they kind of saw this gap. And so they combined the two different disciplines, which was having a security background, understanding the industry, knowing the terminology, with racing drivers. And they found that it was a lot easier to take a racing driver and teach them all about security and what the industry is about than taking a security personnel and trying to make them a professional race car driver. And so that's how I got involved. Was I was the race car driver that they were going to teach all about security.
That's a really interesting overlap. You have to imagine one of those roles is oriented toward getting somewhere as fast as you possibly can, potentially endangering the risk of your own self doing that, like the race car driver, versus the security driver, where your goal might be to get somewhere quickly, but not necessarily as quickly as possible, jeopardizing the safety of yourself, of your passengers. But there's this other element of the human factors, getting somebody there safely and quickly, and being able to offset or anticipate any sort of threats or, delays or unnecessary perturbations that could occur along your route to make sure that safe arrival is first and foremost.
Yeah, there's a lot more that goes into security driving in the sense of like the time and place that it happens, right? Now, teaching someone how to drive a car quickly and maintain control of the vehicle, that's usually the same across the board, right? But it's understanding the significance as to why you're doing the things that you're doing in security driver training and closely relating that to potential security scenarios. That's where there's some of those differences that you need to know the sort of mindset that these people have in being a security driver and protecting these people. And I will add the one thing that was very different coming as a race car driver into the security world is you need to teach people how to reverse. Now, reversing in racing, you don't need to know how to reverse really well or quickly. That's just not a part of the game. And so coming in as the racing driver, that was like the most alien to me, was like backing up and like backing up away from barricades or obstacles or roadblocks or whatever it is. Like, you need to be able to operate a vehicle, if you're escaping something, quickly forward as well as reverse. And that was like the biggest learning curve for me.
Yeah, I have to imagine there's a totally different set of constraints for what is acceptable in what circumstances, right?
Right,
At the
exactly.
racetrack, you drive the circuit. You're not supposed to drive off of it. Even if it gets you there faster, that sort of violates the contract that we have together. So I guess the overall approach is what I'm interested in here for security driving and executive protection. Can we break down the approach, the mindset, the sort of high-level way that you go about this and how that differentiates from other forms of driving? Maybe we start off with talking about awareness and, the surroundings of where the vehicle is. That seems like that's the first and foremost thing that comes into the equation of what do we do to be safe.
Right. And that is what I teach, is like the very first thing that you can do as a security driver that is going to be to your greatest benefit is situational awareness to prevent any sort of thing from occurring in the first place, right? If you're paying attention to your environment, you might be able to identify an obstacle before it even becomes an emergency situation that you need to avoid something. Now, the other thing that you're talking about in regards to like the environment in which the vehicle's operating in, there is a whole separate category within security driver training that is vehicle operations. Now, this isn't necessarily vehicle operations in regards to gas, brake, steering wheel, like how a car operates.
Put in the key, turn it.
Right. It's not that, but this sort of element of engaging with the vehicle and disengaging, meaning putting people inside of it and taking people out of it, that's its own separate training of getting comfortable with, if I'm the driver and I have a principal, the person of interest in the back seat, how do I exit the vehicle? How do I help them exit the vehicle to ensure security and safety? What sort of situational awareness do I need to have to be able to observe as my individual exits the vehicle? And like I was talking about, the most dangerous place that you can be is inside or around a stopped vehicle. And so there's a lot of emphasis in security driving solely put on how you enter a stopped vehicle and how you exit a stopped vehicle and what sort of process that happens. Now, I don't personally do that training because it's very operational, and it's more in line with what you would learn in like the military, right? Because if you're ever exiting a vehicle in an active war zone, you're always going to assume that someone's trying to hurt you, right? And there's a very specific way you want to exit and enter the vehicle, as well as communication, right? Communicating, if you have another security personnel in the passenger seat of the vehicle, how are the two of you communicating? Which one does what step? Which one follows? So it's very military-esque in that sense of like step 1, step 2, step 3. It's learning the process.
Yeah, it seems like let's shift away from that part of it to the vigilance required and the skills that a defensive driver or executive protection driver here would need to have.
Once you're behind the wheel and you're moving, now that's more the area in which I take over. And the driver trainings that we'll perform mainly covered exploring and understanding the limits of the vehicle. So obviously we talk about, visual, being able to observe your surroundings, but mainly the driver training aspect that we put them through is like, if things happen and you need to drive a vehicle either very quickly, meaning you're being chased, which in reality, for these individuals that are driving around these important people, the likelihood of them being chased is pretty low. Like, that's not the thing that's going to happen most often. Do they need to be trained to be able to handle that situation if it does occur? Yes, absolutely, right? That's worst case scenario. I'm being chased by bad guys and I need to escape, and the individual in the back seat has their life at risk and I need to get them to safety. Now, if you need to drive someone to safety very quickly and maximize the capability of the car, you need to ensure that you're not going to lose control of the car driving fast to where you put that person in a dangerous situation on your own.
Right.
So that's one element of it. Now, the higher percentage things that may occur while you're driving around a principal is the random stuff that can happen on any day-to-day basis out there on the roadways. And that means someone slamming on their brakes in front of you, obstacle in the roadway, person crossing a crosswalk that you're not expecting. These just basically emergency evasive situations. And now in any of those situations, you want to understand the capability of your car as much as possible. How quickly can it stop? Can I stop in that amount of distance at this speed? And that just takes doing reps and doing it in real life, understanding the braking potential of your vehicle. And then as well as understanding the handling potential. Okay, I can't stop in time. Can I turn the steering wheel? And what sort of technique do I need with my steering to be able to maneuver the car into a safe zone, right? I think we've all been in that situation maybe on the freeway where the traffic stops a little bit quicker than you think it does. You go to the brake pedal, you're like, I don't think I'm going to be able to stop in time before I hit the person in front of me. Do you have the whereabouts to be eyes looking to an opening, safe spot, and do you have the skill set to be able to maneuver that car and utilize its capability to put yourself into a safer situation? And so that's a lot of the things that we work on, is basically just exploring the limits of the car, understanding what's going to happen when we use more and more of the vehicle's potential, because frankly, a lot of people aren't used to using more than 30% of the vehicle's capability. They've never slammed on the brakes. They've never turned the steering wheel hard. They've never accelerated hard. And we need to be comfortable in these emergency situations that we can effectively use around 80% of the vehicle's capability.
I'd imagine in the same way, the defensive and evasive driving, those are reactions that you need to have to some circumstances that occur. There's probably only a few techniques really that there can apply there, right? There's turning the vehicle in a careful and precise way. There's braking the vehicle, right? Coming to a stop or slowing down in a controlled way. There's speeding up, right? Rapidly accelerating to create an opportunity to get out of the situation or move from where you are to somewhere else. Skidding, are those the kind of high-level categories, or is there anything else that I missed there as for defensive and evasive technique?
Yeah, so like that pretty much covers it, because all of this can get boiled down to that you need to understand the vehicle that you're driving and be comfortable with utilizing it. And we talk about this 80%. You should be comfortable driving a car at 80% of its capability. And not a lot of people do that. And so, like you were talking about, that's exploration of slamming on the brakes, right? It's 100% of its braking capability. I'm braking as hard as I possibly can. Let's get comfortable with that. How does that feel? How hard do I need to hit the brake pedal? Really understanding that, locking that in. Now, in a lateral sense, turning the vehicle, what is 80% of this car's cornering capability? Now, that's one thing to understand, but then also working on the technique that goes with that of how I hold the steering wheel, how I turn the steering wheel, how much do I need to turn the steering wheel to make this corner, things of that nature, right? And there's a lot of technique that goes into turning the vehicle. Accelerating the vehicle, that's an easy thing, right? I think we've all floored a vehicle at some point, so that's not a big concern. We do that in the trainings just to get up to speed, right? Just floor the vehicle, get comfortable with flooring the vehicle. And then talking about what you're talking about of skid control. Now, that's a thing that we cover as well. And, the difference between understeer and oversteer, because once we go over 100% of the car's cornering capability, it's out of control. It's beyond its capability. That means it's sliding on the pavement. Now, that comes in two flavors, like we know in track driving. Either the car is going to understeer or it's going to oversteer. Either way, it's sliding. It's whether the front axle gave up, the front tires gave up first, that's understeer, or if the rear tires are giving up first, which is oversteer. And understeer, that's an easy thing. A lot of the exercises that we do, they'll get to the point that they push so hard, they're going too fast, and they turn the steering wheel and nothing happens. There's understeer, right? What's the solution? Go slower, or use the brake a little bit. Slow the vehicle down, you'll regain control, or the electronics are going to engage and bring the car into control for you. Now, within the training, we do a skid exercise for oversteer. So getting comfortable with the car swinging around. What is the process of how to recover? Getting your eyes looking where you want to go. Nice quick hands, counter steer. Waiting for the car to stop rotating, catching that slide. Once you have the car back under control, how to get it back straight again in a very controlled manner. So we cover all of those basics of basically just getting comfortable with maximizing the car's capability.
This is what we call car control in terms of track driving or racing. And one of the things that we learn in that space that I think is actually lacking in a lot of regular driver training for the streets is that idea that your tire can only do up to 100% of its capability. And the tire is there to do one of three things: to accelerate, to turn the wheel, cornering, and then finally braking, stopping the vehicle, slowing the procession of that wheel in the direction that you're going. And if you exceed 100% total for the amount of acceleration and turning, or braking and turning that you're doing, the tire will no longer have grip and you will slide, right? So this is a matter of understanding the dynamics of how tires work under load in a vehicle and what to do when you're at that limit of potentially exceeding the traction capability of that tire.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like at the end of the day, the difference between learning to drive a car fast on track and learning to drive a car fast in a security sense, it's the identical basics, right? Both of those vehicles are under the control of physics. This is all just math and science. We have friction coefficients, we have lateral G's, we have forces, we have all these things to take into consideration. And managing a vehicle at and close to its limit is identical whether you're in a sports car out there on the racetrack or you're in a big heavy SUV that could potentially have some armoring. Now, there are slight nuances between the different styles that you can have driving a sports car versus an SUV, and those are things that we talk about in the course of, the difference of once you get into an SUV, how the center of gravity getting higher changes the vehicle dynamics, which then influences the type of driving style that we can have. Now, the thing is that when you move from a sports car or even a race car to a sports car, you can't be as aggressive with the steering inputs that you have when you're in a sports car comparative to a race car, right? The race car has higher capabilities. It can take a more aggressive steering input because it has that capability of being able to hold on to it. Where as soon as you move into street cars or sports cars, they have a little bit more body roll to them, right? So you can't be as aggressive because you can shock that front tire if you're not patient enough for that car to load up on its suspension. Now, if we went from a Porsche sports car to an SUV, it's even more drastic in that sense. It has more weight that it needs to move around. It has softer suspension that has more travel that takes longer to set. So as soon as you start getting into heavier and higher center of gravity vehicles, the main thing that changes is just that steering technique that's required to effectively move the vehicle without overloading the tires.
Ultimately, it comes down to this vehicle control, right? And if under the varied conditions, you can manage the car, keep it under control, even at high speed acceleration, even at a quick brake, even, I would imagine, this isn't a protected area like a racetrack. There could be deviations in the road, construction, broken up pavement, potholes, maybe even off-road circumstances that one would need to manage a car, in particular if these defensive or evasive conditions were to occur, needing to manage a big, heavy SUV that's not designed to drive over a curb. Now you find yourself needing to drive over a curb.
I think the biggest thing is those big, heavy SUVs are not designed to drive fast. And now we're in a situation where if I'm a security driver, I need to know how to drive this thing quickly and not lose control. Where a race car is a little bit easier to drive fast because it's designed to do that. It wants to do that. And these SUVs, what I found, because every once in a while I get to do demos or I get to, do the exercises and show off the capability of the vehicle, the car fights back. It doesn't want to go fast. It wants to be treated very soft and very politely to be able to go through stuff. You can't muscle these cars like you can muscle some sort of race cars. You can't just force them to do things. You have to understand their limitations. And the limitations, like you were talking about, that like circle of grip, like we talk about with the tires capability, in those bigger SUVs, it's smaller. And so it's a lot easier to overdrive the vehicle, to be beyond its capabilities. And so in this training, not only is it getting these guys comfortable with, okay, I need to be outside my comfort zone, driving this car faster and still maintaining control, but it's also understanding how easy it is to hit that upper limit and bust through it and just be overdriving the hell out of the car, where now we're screeching tires, the stability control is engaged, and we're out of control. So yes, we can drive fast. Driving fast is not difficult. Driving fast under control, that's the ultimate challenge. And so there's every once in a while you get those guys that just throw speed at a situation and have no idea what's going to happen on the other side of the car's capability.
Back to what we were saying at the beginning of the discussion, most of the time when people are in these roles, they're driving day to day. They're not driving the exceptional or defensive line or applying that technique. They're just getting somebody to where they need to be as safely and, efficiently as possible. So let's talk about the specific techniques then. Okay. So we know that, you always want to be thoughtful about how you're going to get where you're going to go and having backup plans or alternate routes that you can take if the primary route is somehow a threat or the conditions are such that you don't want to be traveling down that route. What are the specific things that a security driver needs to be doing in assessing those conditions and applying the techniques that they've learned in the vehicle to get where they need to get safely?
Most of the time, 98% of the time, whenever these guys are driving vehicles, nothing exciting happens. There is no threat. There is no danger. There's no reason to drive fast. And so on that day-to-day, when they're just driving around, and that's the thing that's very hard to communicate to these guys, is you still need to use proper driving technique. Even though you're not driving fast, you still need to have that same technique. And there's a lot of things that we cover in the course in the very beginning, which is seating position, how you hold the steering wheel, how you adjust your mirrors, all these sorts of things that apply to day-to-day driving and just having a nice, controlled, comfortable position behind the wheel. And the reason why we try to force them of like, you need to be doing this all the time is because if you need to transition from your 98% driving style to then that 2%, I need to do something aggressive and evasive, you don't have to switch anything. That I don't need to start adjusting the seat to be like, I need to be a little bit closer to the steering wheel to be able to do this aggressive maneuver, or even the same thing of that sort of technique and how I'm holding the steering wheel or how I'm using the pedals. There really isn't a difference at the end of the day between driving fast and driving smooth on a day-to-day basis. Because driving smooth is using that proper driving technique just well below the limit of the vehicle. Driving smooth through a corner, braking in a straight line, releasing the brake pedal as you turn in. As you unwind the steering wheel and going back straight, smooth back on the throttle. So like you were talking about with that circle of grip of what the tire can do, it's three things: brake, turn, and accelerate. Cars realistically like to do one thing at a time. Is that completely true? No, right? We can blend those actions. As one thing takes away, we can add in another thing. But to be a smooth driver, at the end of the day, you're almost like a chauffeur at this point as a security driver. For most of the time, you're just trying to drive very smoothly and not spill the principal's coffee in the back seat. But that technique that's required to give him or her a comfortable ride in the back seat is the same thing that you need to be doing when you're driving fast, which is smooth and having a proper technique and using one thing at a time with the vehicle's capability to not overload it or lose control.
So let's say you arrive at a security training, you have your pool of candidates who are there for the day to try to learn this thing, and you're the instructor. Walk us through some of the exercises that you'll put these folks through to help them understand the vehicle dynamics and controls that they're going to require.
So there's a lot of classroom time. So going over the topics like we talked about earlier in this episode of just the processes, mindset, steering technique, seating position, all that sort of stuff. Now, when we get out to the track and we actually start to get to drive, the exercises are divided up the first day. It's a 2-day training. The first day, it's divided up of reversing and going forward. So there's 2 reversing exercises that we'll go through, and there's 2 forward exercises that we go through. Now, the first of each category, so the first reverse is just getting comfortable with using the mirrors, operating and reversing the vehicle in tight spaces, understanding the corners of the car. Simple stuff. We'll push to be, hey, you need to go faster and faster and faster and faster just to get comfortable with doing things quickly and promptly, right? There's a difference between executing something at a slow speed versus being comfortable with executing and performing at the same level at a high speed. So always push them outside that comfort zone. And then the forward exercises, those are mainly focused on exploring the car's lateral capability. So it's handling capability. So that's sort of slaloms and stuff like that, maximizing the turning, understanding that you need to position the vehicle between 2 sets of cones. And that's where we start to introduce this concept of 80% of the vehicle's capability, which is based on the vehicle's manufactured recommendation of what its handling capability is. And then the distance we have the cones, it gives us a speed of what is 80% of that car's capability. So that's where they finally kind of get their feet wet in the sense of, I need to push the limits of the car. And we start to tell what are their downfalls as a driver. You can find out a lot of Do they have slow eyes? Are they too aggressive with the steering? Are they too slow with the steering? Are they too conservative? They're just going too slow. What is their sort of natural way of driving or natural holes in their driving technique? And we start to work on things there. The second half of the day, we take those two categories, reversing and going forward, and we add more elements. So in the reversing, we'll do a reverse slalom. We add some more elements, more dynamics, weight transfer, understanding how that's going to affect the vehicle in reverse, as well as more dynamic finding references, using the mirrors, using different formats in reversing. So you can use the mirrors, you can look over your shoulder, you can use the reversing camera, getting comfortable with all those things, because depending on the situation, one might be useful, one might not be useful. You might need to transition, all that sort of stuff. And then in the forward exercises, we move on to more of a obstacle avoidance as well as a decision-making aspect to that as well. So taking the skill sets they learned in the slalom and then now applying it to more of a real-world situation where they need to respond, and the situation isn't always the same, so they need to make that decision, and also testing their reaction time to respond in an adequate amount of time to that.
I imagine this training takes place in a big parking lot or a paddock or a place like that. So I'm trying to picture, we put down some cones, right?
Yep.
There's the need to be able to say, stop the vehicle from this cone as quickly as you can in a controlled way, just to teach people how quickly the car can actually stop or can't stop if it's a big, heavy car.
Right, yeah. Everyone always thinks about being a driving instructor as this glamorous career, but at the end of the day, you're pretty much just standing in a parking lot filled with cones. But yes, day 2 is when we introduce exploring the limits of braking. And so we'll explore the limits of braking, understanding stopping distances at different speeds, but then also braking and turning at the same time. So being able to perform a lane change while still braking the vehicle. So understanding how does ABS, the system in our brakes, affect the handling capability of the vehicle as well? And how can I maximize the maneuverability of the vehicle while engaging the ABS? So it's a more dynamic than just braking a straight line. So that the braking exercise is pretty fun. Day 2 is also when we introduce oversteer. So we do an oversteer exercise. And then the second half of day 2 is all about working under stress. So then we take all these basics that we learned, handling the car, the capabilities of the car. Now we apply it to more of a security situation and apply pressure and stress.
Right. I think about that day 1. You mentioned reversing versus going forward, doing a slalom. So you have these fixed cones. They're in a position. People need to learn how to traverse those cones as quickly as possible without running into them. Then there's a matter of you can't always predict where you're going to need to go. So how do you do that with cones in a parking lot to tell people? Is there a signal that you throw or something that's like a last-minute indicator to them that they need to change their intended direction?
Yeah, so it's a multi-lane exercise. You come into it at a certain speed. As you approach, one light will go off. There's 2 lights. One will go off, and you need to go to the opposite side that the light illuminated. So it's kind of counterintuitive. You think like, okay, the light goes off, I'm going to go towards the light. But in the real world, the light is representative of an obstacle, danger, lanes closed. And that's more real world because whenever an obstacle goes into our path on the roadway, you first must look at it, identify as an obstacle, and then get your eyes looking and go the opposite side of whatever that obstacle is. And so, yeah, when they come in, a light will flash and they have to go to the opposite side.
Got it. So it's like you're coming into a T junction, and before you get to this T, there's going to be some indicator of which direction you have to go, but you don't know until you get right up on it.
Right. It's still a straight lane. It's like if you're on the highway and like a box appears in your lane and you need to quickly shift to the left lane and then back to your lane. So it's a lane change to the left and then back to center. So it's the same thing of maximizing the car's handling capability, like the slalom, turning and then turning back. So it's 2 turns, but it's more like obstacle and roadway, don't hit pedestrian, avoid them, get back in your lane.
Got it. So that all still sounds relatively planned, except for that thing that suddenly crops up at the last moment.
Exactly.
And do we refer to those as evasive as well, even though you're not trying to really, well, you're trying not to hit something more than get away from it?
Right. And once again, going back to the conversation of avoiding obstacles is more what's going to happen on a day-to-day than running away from someone.
Right.
Now, that sort of technique of utilizing the steering wheel, getting your eyes focused on where you want to go, can also be applied if you're being chased. Because at the end of the day, being chased All you need to do is drive the vehicle quickly and understand its capabilities, not overdriving the car. And so all these exercises, if you overdrive the car, it's going to penalize you. You're not going to be able to maintain speed. So both the slalom and the barricade, we will measure the vehicle's speed, and you need to maintain a certain speed through the exercise. And so if you make a mistake, meaning you turn the car too aggressively or you turn the steering wheel too late based on the references, you're not going to be able to maintain that speed. The car is going to engage its stability control. It's going to kill the power. It's going to slow you down, and you're not going to be able to carry through. So it's all about eyes where you want to go, confidence in your steering inputs, proper steering technique, and maintain that momentum.
Got it. So that's really a defensive maneuver, even though it's not so much defending against an attack, it's dealing with a changed circumstance such that what was previously out of control can be put back as close to as in control as possible.
Exactly. And once again, that's what these guys are going to be dealing with more so. I mean, so many people get involved in security driving, and they have this misconception of like, it's James Bond, right? It's Hollywood. I'm getting chased by the bad guys. Explosions, J-turns, jumping vehicles, fireworks, whatever it is. And in reality, security driving on the most is kind of being a glorified chauffeur. I don't like calling it that because these guys are way more certified and qualified than that. But for the most part, if I'm driving around a very important person, I'm just ensuring that they have a nice, smooth, safe, comfortable ride. Now, the safety aspect of that is ensuring that if anything outside of my control and my environment that occurs, I can maintain enough control of the vehicle to ensure that we don't get into an accident or have a complicated afternoon of dealing with insurance and stuff like that. And so just being a safe and aware driver is a huge part of being a successful security driver. And once again, the skill sets that you need to avoid an accident on the roadway are the same sort of skill sets that can be applied to, I want to drive this vehicle fast and I need to escape something. They're both the same.
Ultimately, it's building this toolkit of techniques and responses to unplanned things, to maintain control, right, even if the circumstances would otherwise dictate that there's going to be a loss of control. And that can be a lack of traction or a lack of being able to continue in the current direction, whether that's side to side or forward or backward. So really, it's a matter of having exercises that teach people the specific skills that they need so that when necessary, they can apply that quick change of direction, quick braking, quick acceleration to the vehicle in the safest way possible.
Exactly. And the last thing that they can't lose control of is themselves. And this is a whole nother element. I talked about the second day of training. We go through stress and pressure. You can't lose control of your own emotions as a driver and freak out, right? And I think a lot of us, whenever we get put into an emergency situation on the street, meaning car cuts us off or something appears in front of us, a lot of us might lose control of ourselves, get overly stressed, freeze, slam on the brakes and just hold the wheel straight and hope for the best, rather than being able to work through those emotions and still maintain control of the vehicle, rather than being like, I'm going to get target fixated and freak out and just hit the car that's right in front of me, or they're wrecking in front of me and staring at the wreck. Also, like racing, I'm going to look for the opening. I'm going to keep my eyes moving forward. I'm just going to try to maneuver that vehicle and keep myself safe. And so the personal control is also a big piece of this as well. And that's what's kind of fun for me on day two is adding that element of stress and pressure and seeing how these drivers respond to that.
Ultimately creating this sense of reaction timing to be able to anticipate things that you can anticipate, but as quickly as possible to be able to identify that signature or that pattern of a thing that's off plan and coming up with the appropriate response to that, the reaction to that event as quickly as you can to continue on safely. Again, there's a lot of parallels here between track driving, even drag racing, and this sort of defensive and evasive driving. It doesn't all apply one-to-one, but you can see where aspects of it carry over and why somebody with a background in being a pro racer and racing instructor would be quite appropriate to teaching people the mechanisms that they need to control the vehicle.
Yeah, and it's all things like, being used to things happening quickly, and you have to move your eyes and look where you want to go and move your eyes quickly and identify what is valuable information, what is irrelevant information quickly, and then being able to take that and make the appropriate decision. And so translating visual inputs to good decisions behind the wheel, that is something that you train for years in racing, and looking where you want to go, and understanding I need to turn the steering wheel this much this quickly to make that happen.
I would imagine there's a common background or mindset of the people who go into this area. Can you talk a little bit about what are the challenges that you face in teaching different types of people, the kinds of people who might orient themselves to or opt into this sort of profession or driving?
Yeah, so a lot of people that get into EP, executive protection, a lot of them are ex-military, ex-police, things of that nature, right? They're kind of used to this sort of industry and environment of threats, high-risk situations, high-stress situations. Now, in regards to driving, there are certain things that are pretty consistent with these sort of people. And a lot of them is kind of this macho behavior, right? Now, there's men and women that get involved in security, and there is a surprising amount of women involved, but there is this kind of, bravado that kind of comes into play, which, I mean, if you're involved in the military or police force or anything like that, it kind of comes with the territory. Now, when they come into security driving, they have this misconception of what it means to drive a car fast, because they come to the trainings and they're like, awesome, I get to drive the crap out of a car this afternoon and drive as fast as I possibly can. And so you kind of have to break down those misconceptions for the most part of what it actually means to drive a car fast. And with this bravado and their background and where they come from, there's a lot of them that just try to muscle the car, force their way through. And with being overly aggressive with the vehicle or overly powerful with the steering, you're just going to overdrive the car, and you're going to be well beyond its limits. And so the biggest challenge is with that category of people, the people that come in overdriving the vehicle, is trying to teach them, no, you just need to drive with proper technique. And I always use the analogy, behind the wheel, it should feel like you're in a ballet, not a bar fight. If you feel like you're muscling the car and you're punching at the steering wheel and you're just, you're doing it wrong. That's not going to make the car go any faster, because you're already at the upper limit and you're well beyond it, and the car's actually going slower than if you were within its capabilities. And working on that finesse is usually the most challenging thing, which we know that from racing too, is you can't just muscle your way through it. There's a certain touch that you have to develop. Another challenge with dealing with people that come from security background, military background, police background, is they don't come from the racing world. I do, right? And so when I talk about driving cars, I'm going to be using racing terminology. And so I would always tell them in the beginning, hey, if I say anything that makes no sense to you, right, that you're confused of what I mean by that, of eyes up, slow input, your line's wrong, or late apex that cone, if they don't understand those terminologies, they might not get what I'm trying to have them do, right? And so I try to learn more and more about the security side of stuff, because they're not only training for driving, they're doing a bunch of other stuff, EMT training, firearms trainings, all this other things, which they're more accustomed to from military and police. And so I'm not a big gun guy, but I got a little bit more involved in shooting guns, because I'm like, hey, if this is what they're doing, maybe there's something I can learn from this that I can translate in the way that I teach these individuals. And the more that I got into doing shooting courses and shooting pistols quickly from target to target and stuff like that, there was a lot of crossover of the sort of technique that you needed to shoot a gun quickly and successfully and be on target with good precision, just like there was in driving and in racing, really. And so I was like, awesome, there's a lot of really, really cool crossovers here, and I could start talking to these guys with maybe gun terminology that applies to the vehicle. Things like in shooting, your eyes are supposed to move from target to target before the gun moves. So they say eyes out in front of the gun. So the eyes should go to the target, gun follows, sight picture, pull trigger on the next target, right?
That sounds an awful lot like look where you want to drive.
Exactly. And your eyes need to be leading the vehicle. You can't just be looking at what's right in front of you. You need to be looking into the corner. Your eyes and your mental process is looking and thinking about the future of where the car is going to be. You're never thinking about the present. And then also finding a target, finding a visual reference. And it's an easy transition into driving, which is your targets are not the things you're trying to avoid. In shooting, it's easy, right? You look at the object and you shoot the object.
Target fixation is something you want.
Right. But in driving, you don't want to look at the cone because you're going to hit the cone. You're going to run over the cone. So that's the main thing that you have to work on with these individuals is just don't look at the obstacle you're trying to avoid. Look where you want to go. And as soon as they can make that transition for their visual reference, they can usually get it of like, okay, my eyes are going, then my hands are following, the vehicle's going to follow after that. And then also, I mean, in racing, we talk about point and shoot, right? I mean, like there is crossovers between shooting guns and driving. And I was more maybe late to the party in that realization, but I thought it was really cool once I made that correlation of that I can talk to these guys in their sorts of terms. And it really makes sense of like shooting a gun and driving a car. They're both very visual oriented activities that also require a physical aspect, whether it's moving a gun, pulling a trigger, same thing of moving a steering wheel, but also that decision-making side of it as well, of when to pull the trigger. Same thing with a car, of like when to make the motion with the steering wheel, when to turn it back, when to go back on throttle. All of these decisions that you have to make in essentially a high-stress situation very, very quickly as you're absorbing information. It is a very, very similar mental process, which I was like blown away by and I was fascinated by. And I was like, oh, this is so cool that there's these activities that are very similar in their mental process, but very different in what they actually are.
Yeah, this parallel exists there where you need to have the technique refined in such a way that you can apply it at a moment's notice. But then to have the situational awareness and ability to plan such that you don't have those things take you by surprise. You're not going to be surprised that you're coming up on a corner on a racetrack because you can look up ahead and see that it's approaching. You're getting closer and closer to it. Similarly, I'd imagine if you're shooting target practice, you can see where that target is and then apply your skills to make sure that you can be accurate with getting close to that target. Sometimes those targets are just appearing, right? I'd imagine skeet shooting or shooting clays. You don't know exactly where the thing's going to be before it shows up, but you do know the technique that you'll apply once you get your eyes to where it needs to be, to how to get your firearm oriented toward and useful in trying to achieve that target like you would be doing in a car. And it makes me think that there's this sort of long-term and short-term way to be thinking. There's the overall plan that you're on. I'm going to get where I'm going. I'm going to make this lap. But then suddenly something might change in a moment's notice that makes you deviate from that plan, but you still need to be keeping that overall overarching plan in mind. And there is a writer and psychologist, I think, named Daniel Kahneman, who introduced this thing in a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, these two different ways of thinking. Do you want to tell us about how that applies here, the System 1 and System 2?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was another really fascinating thing for me to start getting involved with was the psychological side, right? That was what I needed to learn was the mindset of a security driver and the sort of situations they're going to be put in and the mental strength that they need, the mental fortitude to be able to successfully complete their job. And so learning more about stress was the biggest thing, was stress and pressure. And with AS3 driving, they're really based in math, science, like actual facts. And so a lot of what we talk about with the people that go through our trainings is how the brain works and what does stress do to the brain. And in that situation, how can you make better decisions, whether that's behind the wheel of a car or anything else, right? This is just understanding physiologically how do we operate as humans and how we can combat those forces or understand what we can do to be better in those situations. And so we talk about the way that the brain is developed, and there's two parts of the brain. There's your System 1 and your System 2. Your System 1 is the lower half of the brain, your bottom part of the brain, which develops very early on in your life. They call this the reptilian brain, or basically thinking about your natural responses to things. And so when your System 1 develops as a kid, right, you're learning a lot of information, you're touching the stove, stoves are hot, right? That goes into your system 1. Like, you don't have to think about it. Like, it's learning the facts of life.
Sort of
for the most part.
instinctive or subconscious.
Exactly. Or, what can go and get logged into your system 1 as well at an early age is, say a dog barks at you when you're young and shows its teeth, and for whatever reason you develop this irrational fear of dogs. It's because that got logged away into your system 1, into this subconscious zone in your brain, and you're like, I just don't like dogs, they freak me out, they scare me, right? That's the sort of stuff that can get into that system 1. So it's just kind of your natural tendencies, your natural responses to situations. Now, your system 2, that's the top half of the brain, develops a little bit later. That is the part of the brain that is able to solve more complex problems, right? That's our thinking, that we can resolve an issue, decision making, things of that nature. Now, the thing with system 2, yes, it's really good at solving complex issues. We get smarter. We can work through things better as we get older. That's that system 2. It takes time. Our system 2 takes time to work through those things. It also is not very good at handling variables, so a lot of outside stuff, as well as stress. So if we think about our system 2 in this sense of when you were studying in high school or college or whatever it was, you needed to study for a really hard exam, you went to a quiet place because you needed your system 2 to be able to not have outside variables. You needed this space, and that's why people go to libraries and stuff like that to be able to study. Or if like you're trying to study or you're trying to solve a very complex math problem and there's a bunch of music and distractions and stuff like that, your system 2 can't work efficiently. So system 2, really good at solving problems. It can create new processes, new things, right? When you're learning a new activity, you're using your system 2 in doing so. Your system 1, it's really good at working under stress. It's very quick, right? Because it's your natural response to a situation. But the only thing about system 1 is if you're relying on that system, it cannot develop a new process. The new process needs to happen in the system 2. Now, the thing is that don't worry thinking like, oh, I grew up and whatever's in my system 1's in my system 1 and there's nothing I can do about it. You can take things from your system 2 and log them into your system 1. The brain is amazing. It loves to be efficient. So if you're doing a activity over and over and over again with your system 2 that takes a lot of time and energy, your brain's going to go, there's a better way to do this. I'm going to put this activity and log it away into my system 1. In regards to driving, we can think about back when we first got our licenses, we're driving around 16 years old, 15 and a half, permit, whatever the case is. But when you were first driving a vehicle, it was a stressful activity. You had to think about a lot. You had to think about every aspect of driving. You were looking at every single external variable. You're thinking about every input that you have behind the wheel because everything is new. It is a new activity. So your system 2 had to control everything in the vehicle. You had to think about every single input. But as we start driving more and more and more and more, I'm sure all of us have experienced this out on the freeway where you think, God, where'd the last 15 minutes go?
Yeah, right. It's that
who was driving?
Background driving.
Exactly. And so like someone was driving, you were driving, but it was your system 1 that was driving because you're so used to that activity. It's your subconscious. You know that you need to be turning the wheel just a little adjustment to stay within your lane. You're not consciously thinking about that. You're just responding to the situation. So over time, you can start logging things away into your system 1. Now, there's a great quote, and this is going back to that adage stress, because within stress, your system 2 basically shuts down. Your ability to think through a problem, no longer there. You solely rely on your system 1. Now, the quote is, in time of emergency, you will not rise up to your expectations. You will fall back to your training. And so that's that concept of the system 2 shutting down. Whatever you have logged away into your system 1, that's how you're going to respond. And so that's why training and doing activities over and over and over again makes you better at handling stress, is because it's just your natural response. It's your natural way of doing things. And within racing, I think you've experienced this as well, is that whenever you drive a track so many times, when you race wheel to wheel, you're not actually thinking about driving a fast lap. That's happening in the background. Your system 2 is actively considering the external variables, which are the other cars. How can I pass the guy in front of me? My system one's handling driving very fast and driving this corner exactly how I need to drive it. And my system two is worried about the problem I need to solve, which is I'm in second place and I would really like to win this race.
So this process for your brain is scanning the environment to see what's going on, what it can plan for, occasionally being surprised or winding up in the situation where the stakes are higher than what we planned for. Now we have to react. And if we react with our system one, right, you might call that your fight or flight or freeze tendency. The only things you're going to do there are what you've been trained to and have learned and internalized to do. If you can somehow step back from that and allow the blood in your brain to flow up to that prefrontal cortex, right, your higher way of thinking, you're able to be more analytical and think through a situation to apply techniques. But sometimes when those things are happening, they're happening at a moment's notice. So back to the racing example, what we're doing is training away that sense of fear that might come up every time you drive at a high rate toward a wall, because you understand and have built a set of techniques and experiences that suggest that this is no longer something from which you need to fight or flight or freeze. It's something in which it's a normal circumstance that you're going to apply your normal toolkit of skills to. So here the parallels are in defensive driving and executive protection driving. You need to have these skills internalized to the point where if you need to call them up at a moment's notice, you're able to do so with high accuracy and precision and in a way that gets you out of the uncontrolled circumstance back into the controlled one as quickly and as safely as possible.
Exactly. So like you're talking about, there's these two different categories in which this theory applies to security driving, which the first one is exactly what you're talking about. Emergency situation, right? I'm coming around a bend. All of a sudden, there's a tractor trailer in my lane, and I have to react to that situation. Now, like I was talking about, the system two takes a long time, right? It'd be lovely if we had all the time in the world to fully analyze the situation. How much distance do I have? How fast am I going? Am I going to be able to stop in time before I reach that? All of that sort of stuff. And in an emergency situation, you don't have that luxury, and so you have to rely on the system one. And us teaching these individuals, eyes where you want to go, move the vehicle, that's going to be their natural response. And so when they come up on the tractor trailer, they're going to move their eyes to the other lane. Is it clear? Yes. Execute maneuver, and they'll be able to continue on their way. Now, the other side of it is the added element of stress, which does lock down that system too. But what can we do to alleviate the stress and open up our system to being more active and more operational? Because in these high stress environment of I'm being chased by a bad guy, they're shooting at me, whatever it is, like that's worst case scenario, big stress, big pressure to not mess up. How can we calm ourselves down and not feel that stress and still allow ourselves to think through the situation, focus on one thing at a time, and continue to move forward and continue to execute? Now, the final thing I want to cover, which you talked about, which was the fight, flight, or freeze. The reason why human beings freeze in a moment is because there is nothing locked away into their system one to solve that problem. Like I was talking about, system one cannot create a new process. And so if they're presented with a situation that, like, I've never thought about or planned for this, if it's not in your system one, that's why you freeze, is because you fingered through the file of your system one and there was no folder that said, how do I escape a burning building, right? Something of that nature. And that's why at young ages, we do that in schools, is teaching kids, hey, if you're on fire, this is what you do. Or like, if there's an event of an earthquake, this is what you do. The more that we hear about things, the more that we can create a file in our system one. So when we deal with a high stress emergency situation, we kind of know what to do.
It's cool how much of this is not just here's the specific technique that you need to know how to move a vehicle, but rather all those psychological effects, those human factors, those things that make people do what people do, and learn how to anticipate what other people may or may not do in order to be most effective. So if I'm listening to this and I say, wow, this is really exciting or interesting, or I'd like to learn a little bit more, can I just like roll up to one of these schools and say I want to learn it? What's the way by which somebody could get experience here or get exposed to this to learn some more?
So the company that I work for, most of it is B2B transactions. So we do a lot of trainings with security companies. That being said, we do have some open enrollment trainings. And what that means is that anyone can pretty much sign up. Yes, for the most part, the majority of people that sign up for our trainings are within the industry. That does not mean that we would turn away someone that is not in the industry and is just interested in maybe becoming a better driver, or thinks that this is interesting and fascinating and would love to spend a day pretending that they're a security driver and go through the training process on the driving side. And so for those open enrollment days, go to as3driving.com and you'll be able to see some of those open enrollment dates. Yes, they're few and far between, but if you are interested in coming out for one of those days, that's where you'd be able to locate that information.
If nothing else, I want to learn how to do that reverse slalom thing. That just seems cool.
Oh yeah, reversing really quickly and just using the mirrors, it's a pretty good party trick.
I want to learn J-turns too. Do you guys do those?
We don't do J-turns.
Oh, come on.
I know. See, that's the Hollywood side of it, is everyone thinks that like, oh, I want to do sick J-turns and slide the front end around. If you try to do that with a Chevy Tahoe, you're most likely going to flip it. So we teach the PC version of it, of a J-turn, which is a Y-turn. So it's a lot more controlled. It's a lot more applicable. It's more real-world application. So unfortunately, J-turns are not a part of being a security driver.
But this is one of those things that you need to demystify to give people a sense of what this actually is and what skills that you need to be able to accomplish it. And you mean what we see in the movies isn't exactly a representation of reality? I mean, come on.
Right. No, and I tell all these guys that come to these trainings in the very beginning, I'm like, I'm here to burst your bubble of what it means to drive a car fast. And I have to just like take everything that you think you know about driving a car fast, throw it out the window. I'm going to give you the perfect equation of how to drive quickly. But if you think you can do it better than me, you're probably going to have a bad time.
Wow. Spoken like a real true professional at this thing. And also somebody who's got to help other people understand where they are relative to the skill level required to do a job,
Right.
and might come in with preconceived notions because of other things that they've been trained in, or even other areas that they're good at. They think that might apply directly to this area. And any one of us who've tried to learn how to drive a car at speed on a racetrack realize you could be a perfectly good driver out on the road, and you have a lot to learn when you get to the racetrack. It sounds like exactly the same thing applies here. In security protection, you might have an idea of how to move a vehicle, but you might not have an idea of when and where to move it, in what way, and what reaction to apply to what circumstances. And there's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah, and me saying that, I'm not trying to sound like, egotistical or whatever. It's more, there's a right way and there's a wrong way to drive a car. Like, there is an actual technique that is required to drive a car quickly, and I'm not going to give you the wrong answers and like test you to be like no, figure it out on your own. It's like, no, I'm going to tell you everything you need to do. I'm going to share and give you all the information you need to be able to drive this car quickly. So I'd appreciate if you listen. It'd make the process a little bit easier.
Well, now you've gotten enough of a taste of this area to kind of know what it's about. If you want to explore further, or if you just whet your appetite so you know now a little bit more than you knew coming in, and that's good enough for you. Either way, that's awesome. Thanks, Sylas, for sharing your experience. I think people know that you're a pro driver, but might not know this other part of your experience and expertise. So it's cool to be able to share that with people and give them a taste of what it's like to be out there helping to train the next round of security professional and executive protection personnel out there in the field.
Yeah, thanks for listening. This has been a really fun episode, and it's been something that I've committed a handful of years in being involved with, and gotten way more engaged with it than I ever thought I was going to be. And it's been fun to be able to share this with other people. It's a very niche thing, but it's a very exciting industry, and it's been awesome to learn and become a chief instructor in that whole side of stuff as well. So yeah, if anyone's interested to see or know more, so as3driving.com and as3driving on Instagram to keep up with the socials as well.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing all that stuff, and thanks for another good conversation, Sylas.
Thanks, Todd.
This has been Cold Start.
Thanks for listening.